Welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I'm the sports editor of the Herald Democrat, Jason De La Rosa, and you're listening to the latest edition of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. We are in December. We have one team left standing. You're probably not surprised who it is, but we are on the verge of a massive, massive game that is always seemingly taking place this time of year. But we will talk about the team that left us this last week, and we will preview the one game that we have left here on the podcast. It is where we all expected to be at this point. We talked about it last week. The last two teams standing were the same team this time a year ago. Unfortunately, we are in the same situation as we were last year, where we are talking about the end of the season for the Collinsville Pirates in the region final and talking about a state semifinal appearance for the Gunner Tigers, playing the same team that they did last year. So we will go out of order like we normally do because there are only two teams left and one of them is eliminated. So we'll talk about that first, and we will recap another great season by the Collinsville Pirates. Unfortunately, having back-to-back 12-2 seasons, setting the school record for wins in each of those years, getting to the region final, having these back-to-back seasons be unprecedented in school history for 2 years in a row like this, and unfortunately it falls short of the best season in school history, which was making the state semifinals back in 2000, and unfortunately it is a deja vu scenario, because the last season and this season are literally the same season. If you look at them win for win, everyone is the same, another undefeated district title, and both of the losses came in the regular season to Cooper, and then in the region final against Albany last year, which went on to win the 2A Division II state championship and is just a couple wins away from repeating that. So they eliminate Collinsville for the second straight year, 52-14. So we talked going into this matchup how it was going to be different from last year, which was more of a shootout. It was a 66-34 final in that one, but obviously still not a close contest. And what the Pirates could do to make up for that. And then we saw what happened with Albany in the region semifinals against Collinsville's district foe Munster, a game that they easily could have lost, probably, if you don't want to say should have lost. It came down to an interception in the end zone in the final seconds to survive that, but they did. And unfortunately, maybe that's one of those things in hindsight that makes you say that kind of woke Albany up, that they got away with a bad game and that they couldn't do that again. And so maybe that came at Collinsville's expense, unfortunately. But this was a game, too, that you look at it as it's taking place, and it's only 7-0 after the first quarter. It's only 10-0 in the middle of the second quarter, and obviously you would like to see the offense putting together something for Collinsville, but that's manageable. It's doable, and then things unfortunately started to get away in the last half of the second quarter. Albany scores twice more, so now it's 24-0 at halftime. And then you're really sort of in a bind. Collinsville doesn't get on the scoreboard until after they're down 31-0, and they don't end up scoring again until after Albany has put up all its points to fashion the 52-14 final. Logan Jenkins, 24 of 47 passing for 220 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. Rylan Newman had 8 catches for 57 yards and a touchdown. Reed Patterson had a catch for 35 yards. Colin Barnes, 2 catches for 35 yards. Lyndon Carpenter, 3 catches for 34 yards and a touchdown, and Carter Scott with 4 catches for 34 yards as well. And I think when you hear those numbers, obviously what Albany was able to do was limit the big plays from Collinsville's offense. We've talked all season. How do you defend those receivers? It usually seems like one of them has a big game, and when you look at those totals, you say obviously that was not the case. You throw in obviously 3 interceptions from a quarterback who had 4 interceptions the whole season coming into the game. Albany did what they probably wanted to do in keeping the ball on the ground to keep the ball away from Collinsville's offense. They did that in a big way with 239 yards. It's very split offensively with 259 passing and 239 rushing, and very efficient passing wise. The quarterback is 15 of 21. And rushing wise, you have 38 carries for those 239 yards. So, and no turnovers. So obviously you knew it was going to be potentially an uphill battle. I obviously thought this was going to be a closer game. You would have liked to have thought that Albany was not as good with what they had lost, and Collinsville brought everybody back. But just unfortunately, this could be a scenario where in a couple weeks, if Albany goes and wins the whole thing again, which I would assume they're going to, if they're not still the favorite, I think probably a rematch with Mart is in the offering for the state championship game. If Albany does win both in a row, you kind of just have to chalk it up to bad luck in terms of you're in the same region as the team that won it all 2 years in a row. That unfortunately you didn't have a chance to play some of these other people that were left in the bracket to get to a semifinal or a championship game before losing. That's something we'll talk about when we talk about Gunner advancing, because that matchup is sort of the same scenario. But it still shouldn't take away from the great run that Collinsville's put together the last 2 years. To go back 3 years ago, and to have them coming off a 4-6 season with all those sophomores, and for them to say you're going to go from that to 2 of the best seasons in school history. I don't know if they would have believed it. I think maybe they would have thought maybe. You see this a lot, regardless of the sport, whether it's football or basketball, or we've seen this in volleyball we saw this in volleyball recently with Gunner, that you get a group, that core group, they've got to figure it out, and a lot of times it's not a linear, but a lot of times it is, because you get a group that comes all the way up through, they get into the high school, and that sophomore year, maybe they're all come back together on varsity. Some of them may have been on the JV the year before. Some of them may have been good enough to be on their varsity sport, not usually in football, but the other sports. They come together, they start figuring it out, they start winning, and you see them make the progression. And we saw that with Gunner volleyball, when that group that won the state championship last season, when they were sophomores. They made the state semifinals for the first time. They all come back, or a huge portion of that team comes back. They make it to the championship game, and they lose, and then the next year they come back and they win it all. And there's a lot of examples of that, of teams getting better or getting back to the same point, having these great seasons. And obviously Collinsville's in that boat. And the only bad thing, of course, is they got stuck in this region. But to do what they did this year, I think is it says a lot, because a lot of times you have that group of juniors that does something that hasn't been done in a really long time or has never been done before, and you all come back and you think, oh, this is going to be easy. It's going to, especially when it's especially when you're in a situation with a realignment cycle of where you play the same teams that you just kick the snot out of just about every game before that. It can be really hard to live up to that expectation. It can be really hard to handle that pressure of, oh, you're expected to beat all these teams and not just beat them, but beat them handily. Oh, you went undefeated in district last year. You're supposed to do that again this year. Oh, you went to the region final and Albany's waiting for you. You should win 3 playoff games and at least get to that point again. And that can be very daunting. That can be very overwhelming. You never know how a season's going to go. There can be injuries. There can be this. There can be that. You never know how the bracket's going to change. What if Albany would have been somehow on the side? If you're Collinsville and you lose a district game, you could have ended up on the side with Albany instead of being on the opposite side as the district champ. So many things can happen. You never know. And for them to be able to go back and do, essentially, they literally had the same season, and it's a great season to be able to go, 24-4 in a 2-year span. A lot of people would trade places with you for that. And obviously next year is going to be totally different because that large group of seniors that were 3-year starters is going to be gone on both sides of the ball. Obviously it's going to start at quarterback with Logan Jenkins leaving. I would assume his little brother JJ is in line to be the starter. But obviously, how do you replace somebody who just threw for 5,000 yards and 67 touchdowns, has had one of the best careers, not just in 2A, but in the entire state, over his career, with almost 11,000 yards passing, over 130, almost 140 yards, almost 140 touchdowns passing. These are numbers that put him in, the top 10 all time for yards and completions and touchdowns. And the guys he's throwing to, how do you replace, essentially 3 1,000-yard receivers in Carter Scott and Colin Barnes and Rylan Newman and what Reed Patterson brings in an all-around, he's more of a defensive guy, but obviously what he can bring to the offense as well. And, Parker Wells. There's so many guys at the skill positions, let alone when we talk about offensive linemen. And then you throw a lot of these guys are starting on defense in the secondary. And it's going to be a totally different look. The expectation, which is a good thing for Collinsville, is that they will stay in Division II when the realignment happens. So that obviously will keep them in a better spot to compete than when they were one of the smallest teams in Division I. So we'll have to see for sure what happens with them and does the district change and how that is going forward. But it's going to be a totally new look. We've gotten so used to seeing this group compete, and obviously many of them are moving over to the basketball court where they were able to make the playoffs. Most of them will be moving to baseball in the spring, where they will face the expectation there of being one of the best teams in the state and returning to the state tournament after getting there last year. So it's been a really special group all the way through, regardless of the sport. And so it's going to be hard to replace them when it comes to a lot of positions next year. But the one thing that you can say is they have had a lot of games where they've been able to get guys in and get experience and get snaps and practice for this extra 5 weeks or so because of the playoff runs, that it's not going to be as foreign to them when they have to step into new roles. But obviously you never know till it happens. And so again, a great season for Collinsville. I would have loved to have seen them play just about anybody else to give them a chance to potentially continue this run. But it does come to an end, and like I said, there's a pretty decent chance that when we look back at this time frame, Collinsville's going to say, well, if it wasn't for Albany, who knows how good our seasons would have been. We just ran into the best team before getting into the Final Four, which is unfortunately what happens sometimes with the bracket. So a great season for Collinsville, and we'll hopefully, like I said, we'll see them make a deep run in baseball with a lot of these same guys like they did last season. And so that means with one team left standing, we will talk now about the Gunner Tigers, who have made it very clear that they've been the last team standing for close to a decade now. For the most part, every once in a while somebody has been able to join them, getting deep in the playoffs. But usually, when we get to this time of year, we're just talking about them, and they were able to win the Class 3A Division II Region II title for the 8th straight season with a 55-33 victory against Jacksboro. This was a game that a lot of people were interested in. We talked about it last week about this was probably going to be the toughest test up to this point in the playoffs. That has shown to be the case the last 2 weeks for Gunner. And this was a game at halftime that a lot of people thought, is this the team that's going to find a way to beat Gunner? It was a 34-27 lead for Gunner. Jacksboro was going toe to toe, matching touchdown for touchdown essentially. But in the second half, you saw the defensive adjustments. You saw a team that had been there before, that if things started to go their way, or for the other team to have things start going against them, they weren't able to handle it, and ultimately Gunner outscores Jacksboro 21-6 in the second half to open up enough of a lead that you felt comfortable with, and for Gunner to be able to advance. From the defensive standpoint, you don't want to say concern, but this was obviously the worst game that Gunner has played defensively in terms of just the total number of points. The season high before this game was 24 points, so they give up 33, and most of that, like we said, is in the first half. 27 of the 33 points is in the first half. They give up 500 yards of offense. 336 is through the air, 169 is on the ground. And it's going to be interesting to see how the next opponent, who we'll talk about in a second, looks at this game and tries to attack Gunner. I think when you look at them coming into this game, there's very few. They're really. I don't know if to say there wasn't a game plan, but even the game that they gave the 24 points against Walnut Grove, which was a game that they won by 40, it wasn't really close, and 7 of those points came on a kickoff return. So technically, the Gunner defense only gave up 17 of those points. It's really hard to look at any game and say, okay, this is how you beat Gunner, or this is how you attack Gunner to put up big numbers. Brock, who is still playing, is playing in the semifinals in Division 3A, Division 1. Again, we've talked about that all season as sort of a measuring stick game for both of these programs, because they were probably both going to still be playing at this point. Gunner held them to 12 points, and one of those was a touchdown in the fourth quarter when the game was 35-6. It's I don't know how you can look at attacking a lot of their film, because the games are so lopsided and they've been so dominant defensively that you don't get a sense of what works and what doesn't work because of the way the games have played out. But this is a game here where right from the jump, Jacksboro went right down and scored. We talked about this is a 13-0 team versus a 13-0 team. This was a Jacksboro team that felt they belonged on this stage, and they showed that right from the start in putting up yards and putting up points. Now, the fact that Gunnar was able to figure some stuff out, and make the adjustments at halftime, obviously that's a good sign for them, because I think this week it's going to be, again, it'll be the toughest game that they're going to play. Now, if you look at them offensively, last week, they did exactly what they've done basically against everybody. Except for the fact that the starters had to stay in the game essentially the whole way through because the game was in question. But again, when you look at the offensive numbers, you could say it's a typical Gunner game. Put up almost 500 yards themselves. Extremely efficient in terms of they get 359 yards on 38 carries. And that throws in a kneel down and some stuff at the end when they're just trying to run out the clock. But for a huge portion of this game, the yards per carry were, 12 yards, 14 yards. It was double-digit yardage. It snuck under there at the end, but for the most part, Gunnar was averaging 10 yards a carry. Passing-wise, 6 of 10 passing was Walker Overman for 118 yards and 3 touchdowns. So they threw the ball. They had 6 completions, and 3 of them went for touchdowns. And like I said, you average 10 yards a carry. Overman also led the way in rushing, 17 carries for 216 yards and 2 touchdowns there. Preston Tarpley's lone carry was a 57-yard touchdown on a quarterback keeper. Brock Body, 11 carries for 44 yards and a touchdown. And then receiving-wise, Dylan Tokar's his lone catch was a 63-yard touchdown. Kenan Lemberg had 2 catches for 35 yards and a score, and Jace Martin had 2 catches for 16 yards and a touchdown as well. And so offensively, Gunnar did exactly what we expected them to do. Again, putting up huge numbers. They get an interception return for a touchdown as well, which was a real crucial play by Benji Rodriguez in the second quarter when it looked like Jacksboro was going to go down and score, and that was late second quarter, or at least in the second half of the second quarter, and that was a 14-point swing. But again, when you look at the overall point totals, Gunnar has yet to be stopped in that regard. Their lowest point total of the season was 35, like we said in that Brock game, against an opponent that is still playing as well. So the Gunnar offense is not as much of a concern going into this matchup against. That was a great trumpet there, I think. Everybody knows who they're playing. It's Canadian. In the 3A Division II state semifinals. This is 6:00 on Friday at Abilene Christian. 14-0 versus 14-0. This is the point, the moment, the matchup, the everything that it has been waited for a year. Everybody had picked this. As soon as last year ended. Before the season, preseason, this is the 2 teams that finished the regular season, number 1 and number 2 in the statewide rankings in 3A Division II. This is, since Gunnar started this run, this is the eighth year of that run. This is the 7th time that these two will meet. Gunnar has the 4-2 lead. Obviously, they won last year in a close game, 21-20, winning at the end, and then going on to win their 3rd title. And if you win this game recently, you go on to win a title because 3 of the previous 4 matchups, the winner went on to win it all. So a lot of people obviously are saying this is the de facto state championship game. No disrespect to the Dangerfield Tidehaven winner, which is who this winner will play next Thursday at AT&T Stadium in Arlington. But this is, I think everybody probably, most people assume the winner of this game is going to be the state champion. And there's a good reason for that. Obviously, all the things I just said. They're the top two teams in the rankings. The winner of this game has gone on to win it all. 3 of the last 4 years. They continually get to this point, and have shown that they are state championship worthy. If you're Gunner, you've won 29 games in a row. If you're Canadian, obviously you're undefeated this season. Your last loss was to Gunner, in this round last year, in a game that, like I said, literally came down to the final seconds. Gunner had to score late on an Ivy Hellman touchdown to win that game, to advance. And I don't know if you can look at the history and say, we expect close games, we expect competitive games. Only 2 of the 6 games have not been competitive, for those who want a refresher. So the scores of these games have been, if they tell us anything, which I don't know if they do or not, 44-34 Gunner starting in 2016, 56-27 Gunner, 17-7 Canadian, 27-20 Canadian, 27-20 Gunner, 33-8 Canadian, and then 21-20 Gunner. So 3 of the last 4 games have been decided by 10 points or less. The first game was obviously decided by 10 points. So for the most part, these are competitive games. I think a lot of people think this is probably going to be another competitive game. You have 2 offenses that have almost literally scored the same amount of points through this point in the season. They're basically averaging about the same points. It's like 60.2 points to 60.7 points. Gunner's defense has obviously been better, even with last week's showing. Canadian advanced with a 31-12 win against Wall, and that was one of their worst showings from an offensive standpoint. But their defense has been very good. They're only allowing a little over 14 points a game. Gunners is a little under 7 points a game. So on average, Canadians giving up a touchdown per game more. But if you look at them, for the most part, especially the last couple months, that's not something that I would worry about in terms of they give up more points. Their worst games, quote unquote worst games, came towards the beginning of the season. I think we talked about Gunner against Jacksboro and what that means defensively, what Canadian can do against Gunner because of them seeing that. I wonder if that if there's a flip to that with this most recent game for Canadian, obviously being held to 31 points by Wall. Canadian had scored at least 56 points in the 10 games leading into this game, and obviously, like I said, it's one of their worst performances. Like I said, you're having a really good season when 31 points is one of your worst performances. But I wonder if that's the flip side for that of looking at having this as the most recent game and to be able to see how Wall was able to, you don't want to say slow down, but at least be able to probably keep Canadian from doing what they like to do. Now, if you look at the totals from that game, I would say that there's nothing that really stands out to me in terms of they shut down the pass or they shut down the run. It looked like they were able to still do what they wanted to do. And like I said, it depends on what you want to say. Is being down 21-0 competitive, which is what Wall was. Is being down 24-6 early in the fourth quarter competitive? I don't know how you want to define some of those things. I think if you would have told Wall it's gonna be 24-6 in the fourth quarter, maybe you take that just because you don't expect to be able to hold them down like that. But there's nothing like looking at the box score where you say, oh well, Canadian had a bunch of turnovers, or they still were very efficient in the passing game. They were still able to run the ball, maybe not as well as they have. It was sort of a normal game instead of a, from the looks of it, it looks like Wall was able to sort of grind out some drives and limit the possessions and run some clock, and that's why they were able to at least sort of hang around, if you want to call it that. But I think obviously that might be something to look at because Canadian did not have the type of output that they have. I do think this game. I do think the winner of this game is going to win it all. I think that's like I said, no disrespect to Dangerfield or Tidehaven. I think you just have two amazing teams, two amazing programs that have dominated their region during this run. I know it we talk about what Gunner's able to do since 2016. And I know not all of Canadians' run comes in 3A because they moved up from 2A. But this is the 9th time in 10 years that Canadians at this point, they have a really good history as well. They're trying to win their 6th overall championship, while Gunners trying to win their 4th. Obviously, Gunners is in a more compressed time frame, starting with that 2016. But even since then, you have if you go just a little before that with Canadian, I think they're going for their 4th in 10 years because they won the 2 years before moving up to 3A. So it's I think it's a very even matchup. I don't know if it's as close as last year, but it's gonna be. I think it's gonna be a great game. I think the big question is, does Canadian find the success that Jacksboro did, and if they do, can Gunner continue to just score at will offensively? It's hard to predict whether it's going to be a shootout or whether it's going to be like last year where and that's the thing too, is you look at last year and you say, well, both these teams again really good offensively, really good defensively, so you just don't know what to expect because if we have a 56-49 game, I would believe it, and if we had a 21-14 game, I would believe it. There's you could have anything in between. It should be a great game though. I don't see maybe somebody tacks on a touchdown at the end. But I think it's one of those games where both teams are going to come away and say, man, one, we lost to a really good opponent. I think that's been the case every time that these teams have played. But it's going to come down to, are we going to go for it on this 4th down and extend a drive? And if we get it, we get a touchdown. And if we don't, if we get stopped, does the momentum go the other way? I think special teams, could be a factor. You get a big kickoff, you get a big punt return, you get good field position, you get a turnover at the wrong time. I mean, I know it's very simple to say stuff like that, but like when you watch a game like I said, like last week against Jacksboro, it's a close game. Like we said, they're going back and forth. Jacksboro is driving. They're close to midfield. They have 4th and 4. They fake a punt. They get it. And And now you're thinking, okay, if they go and score, that's a huge play. And then the next play, Benji Rodriguez picks off a pass and goes 54 yards the other way. And it's like they punted. But that momentum just totally shifted because you're in 3 seconds, you're like, oh, Jacksboro's going to go take advantage of this, and then they don't. And not only do they not take advantage of it, but Gunner gets 7 points off of it. And that ends up being, that 7 points ends up being the difference between either a tie game at halftime or Jacksboro leading, and then who knows how the second half starts because Jacksboro went into the locker room with a lead or tied instead of down 7, and you can literally point to that as the play. So it's going to be something like that because that's usually what close games turn on. In the case of last year, it was a missed extra point. It was as simple as how do we get to this final score? Well, that's exactly how you get to that final score. Is it's the fourth quarter. It's 14-14. We're getting to the middle of this fourth quarter. Canadian scores. The kick gets blocked. The extra point gets blocked. So now it's 20-14. And of course, everybody is thinking, which is the right way to think. I don't say unfortunately, but if Gunner goes and scores, then they kick the extra point and they lead instead of just tying the game and going to overtime. So when Gunner scores with 17 seconds left, what happens? They kick the extra point and now they have the lead instead of going to overtime. And that was the difference. And if you looked at the yardage and you looked at the, you say, well, neither team had a turnover and, the yardage was pretty even and they did this a little better and we did this a little bit better. And, we punted 8 times and they punted 7 times. And, the penalties were relatively, they weren't as bad, for us compared to them. But they had more first down. So maybe it evens out. I don't know. But literally, you can look at that one play and say, "Well, that's how we lost the game," and so that's the stuff that you think. That's the stuff that changes. God forbid we talk about injuries. If a key guy on either side of the ball goes down with an injury in the first quarter or in this third quarter, and they've got to make changes on the fly, and the guy who has to play more snaps than expected and move stuff around and all that stuff is a factor. And we're at the point now where everybody is good and these teams have been very good for a very long time. They know each other. I don't think you get a lot in terms of wrinkles and change. Like Gunner's going to do what they do on both sides of the ball. Canadian's going to do what they do on both sides of the ball. And the best team's going to win. The best team at blocking and tackling and not making mistakes and not getting penalties that turn, that negate a first down or turn a first down into 1st and 15 or 1st and 20, and then that drive basically is dead because the other team is so good. That's the difference. And somebody really good is unfortunately not going to be able to play for a state championship, and somebody really good is going to. And we're probably only going to have another year or two of this rivalry. We will see in realignment. I think, as I've been saying and in the stories that I've written, I assume that it's Gunner is pretty safe from staying in 3A Division II for at least 2 more years. Talk to me in 2025, and I'll probably be telling you a different thing. And that Gunner's definitely moving up, but I think Gunner is safe for 2 more years. I think Canadian, there's been talk about Canadian at some point here in the future dropping down back into 2A. I think, again, that it may be ironic that it may happen in 2 years so that not only is Gunner moving up, but Canadian moves down, and we actually literally have a 10-year window where 9 of the 10 times Gunner and Canadian meet. It would make a great 10-year bookend, start to finish, that these two are going to play each other. So we can talk. I mean, like I said, you could talk all day about the history and the fact that, like I said, I mean, as soon as this game's over, people are going to say, see you next year, because we're going to win Region 2 again, and you're going to win Region 1 again, and we'll be right back here again. Like I said, assuming nothing crazy happens in realignment, we're looking at this as the possibility for 2 more seasons, because these programs are that good. So it's going to be a fun one. Every game, I think after the third round is always interesting. The best teams are left standing. The cream is rising to the top. And it just so happens that I think the 2 best teams, I think a lot of people think the 2 best teams are playing in the semifinals instead of in this. That's the only thing I think when this ends that I think everyone's going to look back and say, I wish just once that they could have gotten to play each other at Cowboy Stadium and have it be for the championship. It can't happen because one of them is going to be in Region 1 and one of them is going to be in Region 2, and they have to play in the semifinals. That's the way it works. I think we get that. But I think the only thing that's going to be disappointing is that this hasn't been for a championship almost every year. I think if that had been the case, you want to talk about really raising the stakes of the game was going to literally decide a championship. I think that would have been amazing. And the fact that, you hate to say, unfortunately, too, Gunner's 3 championship wins have not been close. And that's why I think everybody says this is for a championship, because when Gunner has beaten Canadian, or when Gunner beats Canadian and goes and wins a championship, the game against Canadian has been the much tougher outcome. And so I think that's the only downside to this rivalry, is that they don't get to do it on the big stage with a packed crowd in Cowboy Stadium, to have the winner get the trophy at the end and say, our win over you is a championship. So, but again, Friday, 6:00, at Abilene Christian. If it's not one of the games of the week everybody's paying attention to, I think I look too. I will throw this out, because we're at that point in the bracket. This is, I believe, one of only, I think it's 3 games at any level that is 14-0 versus 14-0. 6A Division 1, you have 2 powers, Galena Park North Shore and Austin Westlake. They're both 14-0 and 14-0. I don't see anybody nobody in 5A, nobody in 4A Division 2. Belleville against Wimberley is 14-0 versus 14-0. And that's it. And Gunner and Canadian. So there's only 3 matchups of undefeated teams. And just in general, because we're at state semifinals, there are only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So there's 15 total undefeated teams left in the brackets, from 2A up to 6A. Gunner and Canadian are one of only 50, are 2 of only 15 teams left that have yet to lose. So it's a great matchup, and I think they're going to give us what we expect from Gunner Canadian. and the way it has been since 2016. So looking forward to it. And again, hopefully from our perspective, we're talking about Gunner going for back-to-back state championships, which is something they have yet to accomplish. But either way, we will definitely have a podcast next week, and whether that's a state championship preview or a wrap-up, because every game at this point could be the last one, and now we have the last team standing in Gunner, and so we will see what happens. So again, if you are making the trip out there, again, be super safe. Long road trip, both directions. I think a lot of Gunner fans are used to it because of this time of year. We've gone to Abilene a couple times. We've had to go to Wichita Falls and Vernon and some long distance destinations. But please be safe on the road. Get home safe that evening. And we will see you next time on the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast.